Welcome back to the Global Ledger. I'm Justin. Today, we cover one of the most misunderstood events of the last decade, I'd say. And that's the 2019 repo spike. This was a sudden jump in overnight repo rates that shocked Wall Street, but barely made the news. So to many, it looked like kind of a technical glitch, maybe, but to others, it looked like the first sign of a system cracking. But what it really was a warning, a preview of the modern dollar system's growing fragilities. Fragilities built into the structure of reserve balances, Treasury supply, dealer balance sheets, and the Fed's evolving operating framework. Let's get into it. Before I start, I think it's important to get the word repo out of the way in its boring nature. Repo really isn't difficult. The best definition I can give is a repo transaction is basically a secured overnight loan. One night. You hand someone cash, they hand you treasuries. Okay, this is treasuries as collateral. Tomorrow, they buy those treasuries back from you at a slightly higher price. Okay, so it's safe, it's very routine, and it's really the backbone of money markets. So once again, a repo transaction is basically a secured overnight loan. You hand someone cash, they hand you treasuries as collateral. Tomorrow, they buy those treasuries back from you at a slightly higher price. So, in normal times, repo rates should trade very close to the Fed's target range because repo is directly linked to the Fed's interest rate implementation system. So, going back to that article, that very long PDF called The Fed Explained, it's explicit about this connection I'm talking about. The Fed uses open market operations in Treasury securities to influence reserves and money market rates. It uses administered rates, and those administered rates are interest on reserve balance, and you'll see that abbreviated as IORB. And the other one is overnight reverse repo. That's going to be abbreviated as ONRRP. And this is to set the floor for short-term interest rates. Its goal is to keep money markets stable and functioning as policy transmits to the real economy. So repo should be boring, but in September of 2019, it wasn't. The days in September 2019, it's September 16th and 17th, I believe. Out of nowhere, literally, the overnight repo rate exploded from around 2% to nearly 10%. This wasn't supposed to happen in the Fed's new ample reserves regime. This was a regime designed specifically to avoid rate volatility. So what went wrong? To answer that, I think we need to look at two big forces. Number one, seasonal plus structural drains on reserve balances. Number two, dealer balance sheet constraints. And I will go in a little deeper on both of those. So number one, a shrinking reserve pool. So in the Fed Explained document, the Fed emphasizes this, how the modern framework depends on maintaining ample reserves so that changes in reserve supply do not destabilize interest rates. This is the entire rationale of the post-2008 ample reserves regime. But through 2018, 2019, the Fed was shrinking its balance sheet. This is called quantitative tightening, QT. We're going to do shows on this later, but basically during that time, reserves fell from about 2.8 trillion down to about 1.4 trillion. Treasury issuance, on the other hand, was rising. So corporations were making large quarterly tax payments. A large settlement of newly issued Treasury securities also hit that same week. All of these events drain reserves from the banking system at the same time. The system was supposed to be ample, but markets discovered that reserves were actually scarce. So, which leads us into number 2, which was the dealers needed balance sheet space, and they didn't have it. Primary dealers are required to intermediate in treasuries, make markets. But treasury supply ballooned in 2019, so dealers had very limited balance sheet capacity. Post-crisis, however, regulations made them more cautious. Funding was already tight. So when reserves dropped that sharp, dealers could not expand their balance sheets to absorb all the new collateral entering the market. This meant that plenty of treasuries, not enough balance sheet, not enough cash. Repo rates spiked as borrowers competed desperately for funding. So, which leads us to why the Fed had to step in immediately. So when repo breaks, the entire money market breaks. And as the Fed explains in their PDF, they make it very clear the Federal Reserve must protect, I've said this before, the stability of the financial system and ensure smooth functioning of the payment and settlement systems, particularly in short-term funding markets. So the Fed stepped in with emergency repo operations, permanent open market operations, and eventually the resumption of asset purchases to rebuild reserve balances. This wasn't QE for stimulus. This was QE for the structure of global finance. So the Fed essentially said, we misjudged how many reserves the system needs. The market is telling us the floor is higher. In other words, ample wasn't ample. And so why does this matter today? The 2019 spike taught the Fed and the world a foundational lesson. In the modern dollar system, the limiting factor is not money. It's balance sheet. It's collateral. It's reserves. This was the dress rehearsal for March 2020, which we're all very aware of, and which everything also broke again and at a larger scale. Even now, in 2024, 2025, repo behavior, the RRP facility, banks' reserve preferences, and the Treasury's explosive financing needs remain central to market stability. The 2019 event didn't break the system. It really revealed the system in some interesting ways. So it showed where tension can live, and it showed where stress emerges. So, and this is kind of where the hierarchy of money starts to become a little bit more clear. So, so I want to thank you for listening to episode 33 of the Global Ledger. We talked about the 2019 repo spike, which wasn't some mystery or some glitch, but a really important signal. In the next episode, we're going to talk about the COVID crisis, and how it wasn't a pandemic crash. It was a collateral crisis. And you could even say a global dollar dash. I'm Justin, and thanks for being here.